Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Porrick Hayes about the main pain points for U.S. tech companies in 2021 as they ramp up following the global pandemic. Porrick Hayes, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Hi, Jonathan. How are you?
I am wonderful. It is so great to be with you today. You're joining us from the Bay Area. And it's interesting, you're from Ireland and working for an organization called IDA Ireland. We'll get into that in a little bit, and you can describe what it is you do, but your office is in the Bay Area. So it's fun to get a little bit of a mix of perspectives from where you're located as well as with your background. I'm excited for the conversation today. We're going to be focusing on the US tech industry and really what companies in 2021 need to be doing and thinking about as they ramp up following the global pandemic. I know this is something that so many organizations are wrestling with and trying to figure out. We've been through a really hard 14, 15 months, and now we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Things are starting to shift back. But things have changed and things aren't going back to the way they were. And so we have to continue to push forward and prepare for an uncertain future. So this will be a fun conversation. As we get started, I just wanted to share Porrick's bio with everybody. Porrick Hayes heads U.S. West Coast operations at IDA Ireland, the investment agency of the government of Ireland. He has spent 15 years advising leading technology and life science companies from across the U.S. on global expansion projects. Over 1,200 international companies currently use Ireland as their international hub, including many of the world's most innovative and successful companies across technology, life sciences, and financial services. Ireland is also increasingly the go-to location for fast-growing companies internationalizing for the first time. Prior to joining IDA, Porrick was part of the Irish team of a leading German financial services company. He also spent 8 years in marketing and consultancy roles within the technology and financial service sector across Europe. Again, wonderful background. I'm super excited for the conversation. Anything else before we get started with the conversation that you would like to share with listeners by way of your personal background, your personal context?
No, I suppose the first thing I should do is correct my bio. It's probably a little bit out of date. It's actually 1,500 companies now.
Oh, wow.
That call Ireland their international home from home. But yeah, look, so I've had a kind of a unique kind of career. The early part of my career was spent in Europe. I actually spent some time in recruitment and IT recruitment and working in tech. When working on problems that many of your listeners wouldn't have heard of, such as the year 2000 bug and the euro conversion projects, but have been in the US for the last 15 years, at Silicon Valley for almost 10. And yeah, it's been an interesting time, I think, to be kind of at that intersection between technology and innovation, and then what IDA does, which is around international expansion.
Yeah, that's great. And I do remember Y2K bug, and I was actually in Seoul, South Korea that day, and I was so anxious to what's going to happen. I actually went with some buddies. We hiked up the mountain for the millennial sunrise, and then kind of expecting to walk back down and have chaos ensue, and nothing happened, but it was good times.
I was in rural County Donegal, so even if the lights had gone out, I don't think we would have noticed because it was pretty dark up there anyway. But I do remember at the time I was in Frankfurt, and I worked with an IT consulting company that was doing a huge amount of work with the banks there. And like looking back, the amount of effort and time and consultancy and IT contractors and IT development that was done just in case this huge problem came at us,
Yeah.
Interesting
Super interesting. Not the topic for the podcast today, but
for another one maybe.
For all the run up to Y2K and the bug and the concerns, it kind of just got washed over pretty quickly as soon as we got past it and nothing really happened. That's an interesting conversation to be had, and like what we should learn from that. Anyways,
we're both showing our age here, geeking out on early 2000s, late 99 technology.
Well, very good. So let's start by if you've already described briefly, but if you could get into a little bit more about what IDA Ireland specifically does and what you do as you try to support firms that are internationalizing. We can start there, and then we can really start digging into really what organizations need to be thinking about as they're preparing, for this post-pandemic world.
So IDA is the Irish government's international investment agency, so our inward investment agency. So we've been around for about 70 years. So Ireland as an economy is very much geared up towards helping international companies as a place to grow internationally. So our role really is to partner with companies from all around the world, large and small, and to help them set up operations in Ireland to grow their international base. So Ireland in and of itself is a pretty small market. Like we have a population of about 5 million people. So most of the companies that are there, they're there to serve their international markets, usually EMEA, Europe, EMEA plus. So we've got a team of offices all around the world. The US is our largest market, so about 900 companies, about 70% of our business comes from the US. And I'm based here in the West Coast. Our team here in the West Coast, we've got offices in Mountain View in Silicon Valley. We've got people in San Francisco. We've got an office in Seattle, and then also in Orange County. And I guess our day-to-day role is kind of threefold. So firstly, we act as kind of an account management, a concierge service for the companies that are already in Ireland. So if you looked at the tech sector, the history of technology in Silicon Valley or the West Coast, a lot of those companies, Apple, Intel, Microsoft, a lot of those early investors into Ireland back in kind of the 80s and early 90s are still there. Now, obviously, what they're doing has changed. In many cases, technology has gone from kind of manufacturing through to, manufacturing floppy disks and licensing software now to kind of cloud development and AI. So we work on a hand in hand with those companies to ensure that their teams in Ireland and their European teams are still kind of fit for purpose, and that Ireland is positioned as a good place in terms of talent and infrastructure so that they can do what they want to do next. I guess secondly, our main job really is to act as kind of as an advisor and to help companies who are looking at that international process for the first time. So we work with companies across technology, consumer, life sciences, so both kind of medical and pharmaceutical companies and food companies, as well as international financial services companies who are growing, looking to maybe have customers in Europe, maybe looking to navigate that international expansion process. So we provide a range of free kind of supports and advice to help them through and navigate that. And I guess the fact that we've been doing this for so long and we work with so many companies, we've built up a kind of a bank of expertise over the hundreds of different international expansion projects we work on every year. So often what we find as well is because a lot of these companies are, particularly the earlier stage companies, they're going through it for the first time. There's a lot of kind of best practice that we help kind of bring through. So I guess that's the kind of day-to-day role. We obviously, as part of the government as well, we have kind of a representative role for business. So we kind of, I guess we're business people who work for the government. And we do also very much kind of keep our ear to the ground on what's happening here in Silicon Valley or in New York or in other kind of major hubs, so that that filters then into what Irish policy, how Irish policy around regulation, around talent development, around skills and education and training kind of comes together. So it's interesting, and it's very much about keeping our finger kind of on the pulse of kind of where the next kind of technology trends are going. We try and stay ahead of that. And then obviously the talent side of it is a huge part of that, because the companies that are operating in Ireland, they're growing international teams there, and we need to ensure that they have the right availability of that talent in order to be successful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's interesting to me. So I'm curious, what is it about the Irish talent pool that's attracting companies like Stripe, Salesforce, Google, other tech firms? You've referred to like many of the great things that IDA does, and the expertise, the track record. I think all that, of course, helps. But what is it specifically about the Irish talent pool that's able to support these businesses?
There's a few things. I guess there is that kind of muscle memory of, in terms of the quality of the workforce, there is that muscle memory of, 50 years of having worked with or had a large base of US companies in particular, or US tech companies, where there is a way of doing business. There's a corporate culture. There's processes and an expertise that's built up over time. So there's that kind of deep track record, as I said, as a place of supporting the US from Ireland. But it's also in terms of the actual people, there's a few things a few policy things that we put in place many years ago, which have helped in that. So we have a very young population. We're the youngest population in Europe. A third of our population is under the age of 25, and we have a pretty good education system. So about 55 to 60% of our kids graduate third level university. University is free up to third level as well, which means we produce a lot of young, well-educated people ourselves. But broader than that, I think the big thing about the Irish workforce is that it's not just Irish. So it is an international, very diverse, very international workforce. And I think that's what companies are looking for when they are going international. If you're global, you need a global workforce. You need to be able to pull from lots of different nationalities and expertise in lots of different markets. So I think it's one of the few locations globally where you can get a pool of such a very diverse pool of multifunctional, multilingual people. So many of the companies I would have spoken about, for example, Facebook, have been in Ireland for kind of 15 years. They have, I think, coming up on 5,000 people there. And they've just announced last year, I think, that they've hit their 100th nationality in Ireland. So it's that kind of,
it's amazing.
It's that mix of, it's that mix of kind of, that kind of young, talented workforce, as well as the management expertise. So I guess, the other kind of advantage to it is that, a lot of companies, when they're going overseas for the first time, are looking to tap into markets. There's a pool of people who've kind of done that before. They've done the playbook. So that management talent. If you're, one of the new companies that's just set up. We had a company last week, Tigera, which has set up in Ireland in Cork recently. They were able to hire, a manager who's been through the same process with another US tech company. So that's important, I think, especially for for an international operation, because it is very, very different to doing business in the US. I think that's one of the things that we see companies maybe underestimating, particularly earlier stage companies. They underestimate how quickly they can build up they can build up business in Europe without even knowing it. And to do business in Europe, it's obviously a very attractive market, but there's a lot of different risks. There's lots of different markets and things to take into account. So having that local expertise in one place to be able to build up is really important. I think Ireland over many years, we've had a very, being part of the EU has really helped, because you've got free movement of labor across, a population of 500 million people. But we've also been very smart about our immigration laws. We have made it very easy for companies to bring in people also from outside of the EU. So if you're a US company, you want to bring a landing team into Ireland for a certain period of time, we have processes in place to be able to help that.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a little jealous about the immigration situation in much of Europe and in Ireland in comparison to the US. We have many challenges here in terms of that diversified labor pool. due to a variety of reasons, but the immigration policy being one of them. Anyways, I think that's so awesome. And like you said, a country of 5 million people, but with such a diversified workforce, a young workforce, a highly technically trained workforce. That's incredible, and a wonderful opportunity for organizations globally, and in your case specifically working within the U.S. To be able to move into international markets. So let's go there next. Why global? Why would a company want to go international? The U.S. is a huge market. Why would they ever want to go and expand into Europe, into Africa, into Asia, South America, whatever? And perhaps related to that question, what are some of the major pain points in Silicon Valley right now as we're kind of shifting and moving post-pandemic?
I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership: Ordinary, Everyday Actions that Produce Extraordinary Results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life.
Well, I think what we're seeing is that kind of going global is it's not often a choice anymore. I think it's, companies are almost global from day one, and they need to be kind of global from day one. So, traditionally, I suppose, IDA, we would have worked with, large the large American multinational. That was the kind of the traditional view. So a large company puts a factory somewhere or brings a large team over. And that's clearly, different now. So companies at a very, very early stage, as soon as you switch on your servers, if they're available internationally, you can have customers, you have people who want to buy from you, they want to buy in their local currency. Then before you know it, you're coming across things like VAT and, okay, now I need to hire some people somewhere in Europe. And now you're looking at complications around different labor laws and how I payroll them and tax them. So there's both a push and a pull. I think the push on it is also the fact that Europe is such a huge market. Like it's a very large, lucrative, tech savvy market. And I think, in order to be successful globally, you need to crack that. And also what's happening, you would have seen it with a lot of companies, is that if you don't get there first, then somebody else in Europe is going to come up with that idea and eat your lunch. So there's both a push and a pull. The push being, we need to get to that market quickly. We need to, there's revenue there. We need to win. And then the pull is that I've got customers who need to be served. And, so I think often it's not a case of if, but when. And like, I know, for example, even working, looking at Airbnb back in the day, they very quickly had kind of competitors pop up in Europe. They came up with this fantastic kind of model and idea, and you had these kind of clones or these other companies in Europe come up. And I suppose they were fortunate at the time that they're very, very savvy management who were very, I think that leadership team were very foresighted in what they wanted to do and how they went about it. But they also had the funding in order to be able to acquire some of those companies and kick that on. So most of the investment we see when we're talking to companies is is a mix of that. Look, that kind of market, go-to-market kind of driven. What I would say is that as well, where it used to be the larger companies that were coming in, we now, like, we work with, on the west coast of the US, a new company about every 2 weeks that's setting up an operation in Ireland. And about half of those companies would have less than kind of 300-400 people globally. So usually kind of the sweet spot we see is that where kind of Series B companies raised maybe 20 to 50 million. Series B, they've probably put some feelers on the ground. They might have a couple of people in the UK or other markets, and then they really see that they need to kind of switch and flick on that international, and that's where they start to kind of put serious bodies on the ground. I think if you look at some of those companies as well, you'll see that about 25 to 35% of their revenue is already international, is ready from outside of the US by the time they hit that kind of that mark. So there's that side of it. In terms of, I guess, Silicon Valley, I wouldn't say that there's really kind of a pain point. I think they're good issues to have to a certain extent, but we certainly see like huge growth in Silicon Valley. There's huge money going into tech in particular. There's a huge number of companies that are growing. Okay, there is kind of some strange things going on around SPACs and different funding models and things like that. But my point is, I suppose there's growth and there's buoyancy. And COVID, funnily enough, for some companies has meant a huge boost in digitization, which means that there's actually more business for them than ever before. But with that then also comes scaling challenges, and there's a war for talent here in the Valley, in the US, I think globally, particularly when it comes to software engineering, anything around AI or machine learning or software data science. There just isn't the supply really in one location. And then also the cost, both of talent here and also the cost of living. I think, for the larger companies, it's manageable. I think for a lot of the smaller companies, a lot of startups, they're just really struggling. Again, to build scale quickly, to go to market quickly, they're really struggling to be able to build teams out in that environment. You throw COVID in there, where people have realized that they can kind of work remotely, has meant that companies are looking further and further afield for that talent. So we would have seen probably, traditionally the types of teams that we've been seeing ramping up has been go to market, so sales, customer support, operations, compliance, back office, that kind of stuff. Traditionally, we've seen a lot more now software engineering and technical and innovation skills coming into Ireland. So almost 50% of our projects from the West Coast last year were innovation led, and I think that is also a driver of that kind of that war for that kind of technology talent. But definitely, it's the last year we noticed with COVID, when it first hit, the tech companies here on the West Coast were the first to go remote. I think even before, it was really prevalent on the East Coast. I remember talking to some of my colleagues in New York at the time who were thinking, look, yeah, I know that there's some rumors of some weird virus, but we're not actually seeing a huge difference. Whereas a lot of the tech companies here had gone remote a lot earlier. So our job at the time, because all those companies have teams in Ireland as well, our immediate job was, look, we need to make sure that they're going to be able to keep the show on the road. They're going to be able to keep the lights on. They're going to be able to get their people still in to be able to work. And I think most of the companies in Ireland did pretty well actually on it. We were able to support them to switch to remote pretty quickly, and able to manage a lot of the we supported business who we had our kind of supports for business the same way we had over here. But I think then after a while, what we saw is that companies started, because again, a lot of them were taking advantage of the fact that online utilization just went through the roof. So they were busier than ever. They were trying to scale. So we actually then, around summer last year, we saw a lot more companies talking to us again, trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I actually need to grow? I've got business in Europe. How do I do this in a post, remotely? So we were able to switch like a lot of our kind of due diligence supports to remote meetings and to remote due diligence. And like a lot of the companies that we work with are growing out there. I think now the challenge we're seeing both here and in Europe is what does that look like post-COVID, right? So you've got definitely, I think, hybrid is the new buzzword that everyone is talking about. I think flexibility is, a must for companies and for employees and as retention strategies. There's opportunity in that. It allows companies to, to pull from a wider pool, which they're taking advantage of. I think it's probably going to have some effect on cost and things like that. I know that people here in the Bay Area, for example, are moving to places like Idaho and Utah and other places and further afield, and companies are paying them less to do that. I think that's one thing. But the other challenge then is, there is a secret sauce kind of about, in terms of creativity, particularly for innovation, of having people together in an office. So how do you manage that so that you keep that flexibility that people are looking for, but also are able to, you're able to make sure that people are in an office environment in some shape or form. So I think we're seeing that hybrid in Europe and in Ireland. We're seeing companies, we have supported remote working with companies actually for quite a while. So like Amazon, Apple, companies like Shopify would have had remote working teams in Ireland. So they have their hubs, but they also have a lot of people working from their home office. So that's something we've supported for a while. I think the challenge in Europe as well is where you have, because the risks of having a very diverse or very dispersed kind of workforce is there are, in EMEA, there's 100 odd countries, that you might be supporting from your European hub or from your EMEA hub. You can't really have 100 different payroll systems, 100 different labor law systems. So there are compliance issues and compliance kind of risks that companies do need to look out for when they're allowing for kind of a dispersed team internationally. So I think what we're seeing companies look at the different hubs where they're comfortable to have people hubbing out of. So they're looking at different locations where they've got the right infrastructure, they've got the right, let's say, legislative framework, where there's business-friendly kind of operations, and then they're managing that. But it's really interesting at the minute to see how that is going to work out. I think Ireland has probably done, quite well. In terms of the numbers, like international investment dropped by about 40% globally last year. So foreign direct investment dropped a huge amount. Ireland's share of that actually held up pretty well. I think a lot of that was because there's that familiarity with Ireland, there's that track record, and people couldn't travel, but they knew, look, I know what I'm going to get in Ireland. There's a very solid workforce, there's a pro-business kind of environment. So we were able to support companies to scale those teams globally and remotely.
That is all incredibly fascinating. And my goodness, there's so much more that we have to discuss, yet I recognize we're about out of time.
Sorry.
So I think what this means is, if you're ever willing, I would love to have you back so we can continue to dissect this, because there's so much that you just said that I think would really be wonderful to dig into. But just to recap and summarize a little bit from some of the main points, because, largely due to the pandemic, we've seen an acceleration towards more distributed virtual workforces across the globe. Now, that certainly was already happening, but we just pushed further faster due to the pandemic. Coming out of the pandemic, that's not going to change. And you made the comment a few minutes ago about, I asked the question, why go global? Why internationalize? And you made the point. It's a really important point that, it's not a matter of if, but when. And we are all global already. Like you said, if you have a web presence and you're selling, you're international, you have to figure out your channels, you have to figure out your workforce. And there is a huge fight for talent, especially for STEM fields, technical fields. We just, in the US, we simply don't have enough labor. And so now people are more and more comfortable than ever before with a virtual distributed workforce. Let's leverage the talents and the human capital that's across the globe. We don't have to restrict ourselves geographically, particularly in a place like the Bay Area that's so crazy expensive in terms of cost of living, in terms of the labor market. like we can tap in all over the world. And so your organization is one of many that's helping organizations to do that. And it's very, very important as we come out of the pandemic that we strategize and wrestle with those realities and figure out what our organization is going to do. To another point that you made about, making sure that we're still getting that secret sauce of the culture, the innovation, all those things that we need to have as we're balancing a hybrid workforce, in the office team with distributed remote workers from across the globe. These are things that we're going to continue to have to wrestle with and figure out what's going to make sense for our organization within our culture, to drive value in the marketplace.
I think you're right. It's a fascinating time, and I think it's a two-way flow. Definitely. I mean, it's not just from the US, but I mean, there's as many people employed by Irish companies here in the US as there is the other way around. So there's that flow of European innovation, European companies who want to come to the US, and they need to figure out how to be able to tap into the market here as well in order to do business here. So so look, I've probably rambled on quite a lot. Ask an Irish person to talk, and that's what you get. But it's been really interesting, and I think certainly watch this space in terms of international. But we definitely do see this. We do see companies will continue to want to grow globally. They will continue to want to tap into international markets and international workforce for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Porrick, it has been a real pleasure talking with you today. Before we close, I wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, how they can get connected with IDA, find out more about what you and the organization can do to help them, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, look, as I said, idaireland.com is our website, and we've got offices all over the world and over the US. I guess we're really keen to talk to anybody who is looking at that international journey and trying to figure it out. We've got a wide range of kind of supports and services to help along the way. Look, just it's a really interesting role we have, and we're very keen to kind of engage with any companies that are looking at Europe as their next step.
Wonderful. Well, Porrick, it has been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time. I encourage listeners to reach out to get connected, find out more about what you and IDA can do for them. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you have a great week. We are excited about the launch of HCI's new magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine designed to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Check out the first issue and let us know what you think.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.